Hello, everybody. My name is Jimmy Smith, and welcome to the Wine with Jimmy channel. For this one's the WSET Level 3. This is part 4 in our multi-part series on sparkling wines for the WSET Level 3 certificate. This one is following on from the last, which was looking at champagne. So far, we've done an introduction to sparkling wine. Then we've done the traditional method, part 2, then champagne. Now we're looking at all the other traditional method sparkling wines. So it's following on nicely from what you know already. This will dive into the world of Cava, Cremant, and then other sparkling wines around the New World, which are featured in the Level 3 textbook. As ever, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please pop them in the comments section below this video. There's also social media at the bottom of every one of the slides, so if you want to get in touch via those methods, you can. At Wine with Jimmy is me, the 2 wine schools at West London Wine School, South London Wine School in London, and then my wine bar at the bottom right. If you're fed up with all this education and you just want to have a nice glass of wine or a bottle, do go to Streatham Wine House down in South London. It is an awesome place, if I do say so myself. So let's go through the usuals. At the end of this presentation, of course, we'll look at a working written question, a small one, but it'll give you an idea of what may come up in examinations, what is likely to be asked of you, in terms of the written questions. And also to reiterate, you will need to know, and hopefully if you've watched the other videos, you do know this, but sparkling wine and fortified wine do come up as a written question in your examination. It is classified as a unit, so you must know sparkling and fortified like you never have known before. You must know it like the back of your hand. Okay, so let's start our journey on this presentation with Cava. So we are going to Spain, of course. Cava originates from Spain. It is Spanish. And most people know that Cava is from Catalonia. Now, Catalonia there, that is just one spelling of it. There are many spellings. As long as you put down some form of Catalonia, you will be fine in your examination. Catalonia is the north easterly point of Spain. But it is not the only region which is permitted to produce Cava. It is a non-contiguous wine style, therefore it's not just one area. You'll see that I've put some yellow dots on the map on the left-hand side. There are several others, but it's only slightly mentioned in your textbooks. But we will have Rioja. Rioja is the second biggest area after Catalonia. Navarra. There's Valencia as well. There's Extremadura, amongst other zones as well. But please bear in mind that it doesn't solely come from Catalonia. The big majority is over 90%, but not solely from Catalonia. But of course, we will be focusing on Catalonia and talking about Catalonia, as most of it does come from that region. And Catalonia, as highlighted in yellow there, and then also blown up to a larger scale with Barcelona as its cultural and administrative city. We have an area which is spread out also in Catalonia. Most of it is centered around a town called Saint Sadurní, and this is the Penedès area, just to the west of Barcelona. But there are other bits spreading out across Catalonia as well. So the DO of Cava predominantly comes from here. Its kind of cultural sort of center is here. This area is a Mediterranean climate for the most part, as it is, of course, sitting on the Mediterranean Sea. So therefore, it is quite a warm area for the production of sparkling wine. It is important to understand that, because that really does shape a different style of sparkling wine for most Cava. Naturally, the acidity levels tend to be on the lower side, or lower than champagne, of course, which is not hard, to be honest. And there's often slightly riper fruit components to it. You'll find often less lees aging, because Cava does not need to have so much complexity added to it through the production method due to the fact it already has quite ripe fruit component. And plus its naturally lower acidities means it can't withstand longer levels of lees aging. So they tend to be on the lighter side of lees aging for most commercial Cavas, for instance. Okay, so that is our region for the main region for Cava. Cava actually comes from the word which means cellar. The original Cava production was called Catalan Champagne or Catalan Champagne, and that's because a person called José Reventos traveled up from Catalonia to Champagne, learnt the techniques, and then instigated them in Catalonia. But when Champagne became a protected name, of course, they could no longer use the name, and they picked their next sort of available name. They thought the Cava, because of these big underground cellars that have been built, was very much a key name for it. So that is Cava. So just a few things on the grape varieties. Now, these aren't highlighted in your book. They are mentioned. So please recognize them. It is unlikely that they'll come up in written question as they're not highlighted or bolded. But there are 3 major key grape varieties for Cava, plus a number of smaller ones, which I've actually blacked out here or whited out, I suppose, because they've been chopped off the top of that pie chart. So the ones that they mention are the 3 that are mentioned here, plus 2 international varieties. So let's go through those. You'll see that Macabeo is the first one. Now, it is required that you understand that Macabeo actually has an synonym, an alternative grape name, and that name is Viura. And that is Viura in places like northern Spain, specifically places like La Rioja. So Macabeo is Viura, a grape variety of very good acidities and often green fruit flavor, but it's not the most complex in style, hence why it's quite well suited to the traditional method. This is the major grape variety, accounting for over 1/3 of the production of the grapes for Cava. Then we have one which is called Xarel·lo. And Xarel·lo, another grape variety which is good in acidity, tends to have a bit more of a savory characteristic behind it, and really gives age-worthy examples. That accounts for about 1/4 of production and often adds more structure and intensity into a Cava blend. And then we have Parrada. Parrada accounts for about 1/5 of production. And this grape variety is seen to be a great variety of the future, good aromatics behind it, and decent acidities as well. All 3 of these are actually noted for good acidities due to the fact we need varieties that naturally carry their acidities due to this place being rather warm, a warm Mediterranean zone, Catalonia. The other 2 grape varieties that are mentioned are Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Let's pop them down there. Chardonnay and Pinot Noir together probably account for about 6 or 7% of the total production. So it's not a huge percentage. They were introduced and allowed as grape varieties within DO Cava in the 1980s. There is a lot of debate over these 2 varieties because they are, of course, grape varieties used from Champagne, many French regions, and across the world for sparkling wines. Many producers in Cava are adamant that utilizing these grapes really dilutes their individuality and their uniqueness with these indigenous grape varieties like Macabeo, Xarel·lo, and Parrada. But the debate rages on, and people do and don't use these varieties. You'll tend to find Chardonnay and Pinot being added to really produce more complex styles, more layered styles, as they are the principal grape varieties, as you know, in the world for premium traditional sparkling wines. So they're your key grape varieties for Cava. You don't need to know specifically where they are found and altitudes, not at this level. It is recognizing these grape varieties. And then the key facts around it. So of course, Cava, this is the other traditional method section. So of course, Cava is traditional method, and it is traditional method only. No matter if it is a £6–7 bottle of Cava or a very inexpensive Cava or a premium style, they are traditional method only. It is the influence through history back in the middle of the 19th century that really started off this production method. So traditional method only. Now, most generic Cava, that is DO Cava, must have a minimum of 9 months on the lees. This is equal to the standard for French sparkling traditional method, like Cremant, for instance, and other sparkling wines. There are, of course, other sparkling wines like champagne that have higher months on the lees, but it is 9 months here. Most of them will sit at around 9 to 12 months, and this is because the wines do not have the highest levels of acidity and already have this ripeness through their climate, which is generally quite warm. Most Cava, certainly because it's dominated by very, very big houses, such as Cordonnieu and Freixenet, most of them are non-vintage, quite large volumes, and then ready to drink. They tend to be, therefore, not the most complex in style, but they will be often dry, medium in acidity, and generally quite easy drinking. They don't tend to be, I mean, they're often pitched against Prosecco in style. They don't tend to be as acidic or as sweet as a Prosecco, but Cava generally is quite easy drinking and quite approachable, hence why it's known by and liked by quite a large populace. But it does, of course, have to compete with Prosecco today, of which it is really fighting an uphill battle as Prosecco has become so majorly dominant in the inexpensive market. And with all regions, really, there will be premium examples. And with Cava, there are some excellent premium examples produced with quite extensive lees aging, maybe 2, 3, 5 years, sometimes even greater. These could be classified as reservas, Gran Reservas. There's Calificada as well, and there is Corponat, and there's others as well, actually. You are not required to know any of these extra names, but do recognize that there are greater premium Cavas out there with extra lees aging. These will tend to be more breadier, biscuity, a bit smoky sometimes as well. Okay, so that is your Cava. You are not required to know a huge amount about it, but an examiner could set a question where they are talking about Cava, but then also link in its production method with the traditional method. So, of course, you must know the traditional method in its entirety. And then, of course, Cava as an example with its individual points we've just listed here. Other sparkling wines made via the traditional method. In France, we have Cremant, and Cremant is a fully sparkling wine to the equivalent pressure of champagne, but not from the Champagne region. So therefore, this comes from another part of France, and there are many of these dotted over the wonderful nation of France. They only require you to know about a few of them, and they are pointed here on this map. So you have Cremant d'Alsace, that is the sparkling wine of Alsace. You have Cremant de Loire, and then you have Cremant de Bourgogne, so of the Loire Valley and of Burgundy. Cremant d'Alsace, now all of these tend to be produced from their local specific grape varieties. So with Cremant d'Alsace, you'll often find varieties like Riesling, Pinot Blanc, for instance, but they will permit also Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. The very low acidic and very aromatic examples like Gewürztraminer and Muscat will not tend to be used for the sparkling wines of Alsace. So it's Riesling, Pinot Blanc, plus Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. The Cremant de Loire will often be made from a variety of grapes, but of course think about its principal white grape. This is Chenin Blanc from the central part of the Loire. But you'll find Chardonnay being used as well. You'll find Cabernet Franc being used for rosés, and even some reds are found from that variety as well in this region. There are specific sparkling wines that I'll need to talk about, And I will go through that in a second with the Loire. And then the Cremant de Bourgogne is, of course, from Burgundy. And the Cremant de Bourgogne means that, of course, if you think about Burgundy's two principal grape varieties, Chardonnay and Pinot, it therefore is in style quite similar to Champagne, but of course will have less lees aging, but they can be quite wonderful. Of course, it's a warmer climate than Champagne, so you'll find that the wines don't have as much lees aging and are a little bit riper in characteristic, but they can be delicious nonetheless. Specific areas we find here, we have, this is within France, we have Samur and Vouvray, and this is within the Loire Valley. So this map is actually of the central Loire areas. This incorporates Anjou-Samur and Touraine. We have two villages which have been identified for producing very key and very often high quality sparkling wines via the traditional method. And that is Samur and then Vouvray. Now, Samur, sparkling Samur, is often made in a style which is from Chenin Blanc, but you can find it as Cabernet Franc as well, and there's a bit of Chardonnay produced in this area. Vouvray, interestingly, the village of Vouvray, which many of you will know for still wines and very high quality still wines with Domaine Hewitt, for instance. Now, the biggest production of this village of nearly 70% is in fact sparkling wine. So Vouvray produces a significant amount of sparkling wine. It is made exclusively from Chenin Blanc, and because Chenin Blanc has a very high natural acidity, higher than Chardonnay, it suits the traditional method very, very well. So you can get some very long lees aged and very age-worthy sparkling wines made via the traditional method here in Vouvray. You may find on the label with a Vouvray the terminology pétillante. Pétillant. And pétillant is what's also found on your tasting card, which means some bubbles. Pétillant is a lower atmospheres of bubbles. It is a less fizzy style, but it is quite common for a Vouvray pétillant to be produced. So they're not as bubbly and fizzy as a Cremant, but they are elegant nonetheless and wonderful sparkling wines. So the aging lengths of these as well must be 9 months minimum for your sparkling wines across these traditional method non-champagne examples. Okay, so that is Samur and Vouvray. And then there are, of course, traditional method sparkling wines from around the globe. And we're first of all going to go across to the other side of the world from France. We're going to go to Australia and then New Zealand. Australia produces, of course, a fair volume production. This map is of southeastern Australia, which is stretching from Adelaide to Sydney and then down to Melbourne. There are some very sort of basic sparkling wines made, but the traditional method sparkling wines, which we have been learning about, of course, these are made in either the Adelaide Hills area, which is the, of course, slightly altitude zone close to Adelaide in South Australia, Yarra Valley, immediately to the north of Melbourne on the River Yarra, and then Tasmania. It's not on this map. It is an island which is just to the south of Gippsland. So for the bottom of this map around here, just if you keep going south, you'll see Tasmania and you'll hit Tasmania. All three of these will dominate their sparkling production with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, the tried and tested grape varieties for premium quality traditional method sparkling wine. Why are all these three good for producing Chardonnay and Pinot? Well, they make very good still Chardonnay Pinot. And of course, when that's picked a bit earlier from these cool maritime affected areas, then you'll have the conditions in place to produce grapes and then wine for good base wine for traditional method sparkling. So Adelaide, Yarra and Tasmania have them in. Tasmania specifically is a very cool climate and it's perfect for sparkling wines. It's some of the best, I think, in the New World. Now, across all of these three, you will find non-vintage. You, of course, find single vintage, rosé production, blanc de blanc, and blanc de noir. Now, the rules, of course, are not as strict and as similar as champagne, but they're roughly corresponding to the same. There are also sparkling reds produced in Australia. A lot of these in South Australia again. And these, produced around Barossa, Langhorne Creek. These are quite heady, powerful, complex sparkling reds, often made from Shiraz, but you can find them made from Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot as well. They are interesting wines because, of course, they are red, fizzy, but you chill them often. You don't have to. And of course, they have some tannin to them and, good acidities. They're very interesting for one's palate to get your head around. But nonetheless, they're quite good fun. So that is sparkling Shiraz, which they have a bit of a reputation for. Next up, we have the country of New Zealand. Of course, this sits just to the southeast of Australia, across the Tasman Sea. Now, the only bit they really want you to know here is Marlborough, although there are sparkling wines produced all over the North and South Island, pretty much apart from Auckland in the north. It is Chardonnay and Pinot Noir again here, as with most of the New World countries. This area is very much affected by the cool conditions of the Tasman Sea and the Pacific. It's maritime. And of course, when you're getting down to the South Island, you are getting close down towards the South Pole. It's very cool indeed, which gives you long, extensive growing seasons with high acidities. So therefore, the key areas here for beautiful sparkling wines, Marlborough is the one of volume, and they produce some delicious examples. You will know things like Cloudy Bay has Pelorus, for instance, which is quite famous. Non-vintage, of course, vintage, rosé, blanc de blanc, blanc de noir produced here, all the classic styles across New Zealand. South Africa. So South Africa, we have tackled on previous sessions for still wines, of course, but they make traditional method as well. And they call this Method Cap Classique. Now, you've got to remember that South Africa has a huge Dutch influence, but also a quite significant French Huguenot influence. That's why you find quite a bit of Afrikaans and Dutch in the country, as well as French. Franschhoek, for instance, the French Quarter, famous for the French influence. Wonderful gastronomic influence there. Of course, Chardonnay and Pinot take the limelight for these Method Cap Classiques. The best will be produced from those, but you will find Chenin Blanc being used and others as well. 9 months minimum lees aging for the Method Cap Classique, but there is an association which is called the Cap Classique Producers Association, where they stipulate a minimum of 12 months. So they are fiercely proud of protecting quality for their sparkling wines. Now, it is a very warm, if not in some instances hot climate, this South Africa and the Western Cape. You must be very careful about the location of the grapes. So you must source grapes from some of the best sites to produce elegance for the sparkling wine. So the best sites will be southeast facing, so that is away from the equator, on good hillsides, and often around coastal zones, maybe around Walker Bay, Elgin, maybe somewhere like False Bay, Stellenbosch, Constantia, all these areas which are heavily affected by the Benguela current and the Cape Doctor. But there are other zones, mountainous areas as well, which will have some cooling effects too. So the information around the climatic influences of South Africa's coastal wine regions can be found if you view the South Africa videos, which are also available on YouTube and the online portal winewithjimmy.com. So that's important, the Method Cap Classique. And then the US of A, and we're really looking at California. They require you to know two here. So you have Anderson Valley, which is actually off this map, to the northwest, and then Los Coneros, which is down here, south of Sonoma, but going a little bit into both Napa and Sonoma coast AVAs. Both of these, so Los Coneros has an effect from the San Pablo Bay, so that comes up through this way. And then Anderson Valley has a coastal influence with the Pacific. So both of these are cooler locations, which means that the Chardonnay and Pinot Noir here are going to be fit for traditional method sparkling with high acidity. Some of the best examples, and in fact quite common for this, undergo extensive lees aging. In Los Carneros, there is a famous Domaine Carneros, which is actually owned by Moet and Chandon. No, it's not. It's Tattinger, sorry. And then in Anderson Valley, you have the brilliant Louis Roederer, who make their quartet and some fantastic sparkling wines up there. So these are often quite bready, doughy, biscuity, quite rich examples from California from these two AVAs. Please make sure you know about them. And once again, this doesn't seem like they can ask you much about this, but they will tie in the traditional method, which of course they can ask you lots and lots on. Let's go through some questions. And these are generally quite easy to go through, but just to give you an idea of what could be asked. Here you have a Cava label from one of the two big houses. This is Freixenet with their Cordon Negro. Where is the likely region of origin for this sparkling wine? It says likely because, of course, you know that Cava actually can come from a number of places. But the predominant production is, of course, Catalunya. That wanting to be individual and independent region situated in the northeast of the country. How is the region's climate likely to affect the style of this sparkling wine? So you must first of all understand that Catalunya is on the Mediterranean. So therefore this Mediterranean climate will tend to impact the style by not producing the most acidic wines or grapes, and producing often more riper fruit components to it. So riper with less acidity. So that's linking in a bit of the natural factors that you would have learned at early chapters of your textbook. What is the minimum aging on the lees? Now, most standard traditional methods across Europe and some in the New World have a minimum lees aging of the classic magic number 9 number. So that is 9 months on the lees. There are more exclusive Cavas which have more than that, but that is not mentioned in your textbook. So you are only required to know about this minimum lees aging. Why is it this low? It's because the wines already have fruitiness and richness due to the Mediterranean climate, and the acidity is not the highest to withstand high and long levels of lees aging. Another question here, what is the name for sparkling wines that are made in the traditional method in South Africa? Remember, think of the French influence of South Africa. So this is where the method Cap Classique comes into play. So that will get you 2 marks as it's quite a mouthful. Method Cap Classique, MCC. The next one. South Africa is generally classed as a warm or hot wine producing country. What conditions in the vineyard are important to produce high quality sparkling wine? So quite a lot can be said here. The grapes would need to be sourced from best sites. What does that mean? Well, these are often located on hillsides with a southeast facing aspect away from the equator, so therefore cooler, or located in cooler regions which are often coastal, like Walker Bay or Elgin. Always please give examples where you can, that experience a moderating effect from the Benguela current or Cape Doctor wind. And that's tying in really climatic influences from the South Africa chapter. Very important for you to think like that. On the first part there, where it's talking about slopes, if you wish and if you have knowledge about mountain ranges, please include those as well. For example, the Boland mountain range, which is situated to the east of places like Franschhoek, Stellenbosch, and so on. So that will get you 4 marks there by tying talking really about mountains and hillsides, aspect, and then things like cooler locations, coastal, and give examples of those. Okay, so that is 30 minutes. I hope you have enjoyed this part of the sparkling wine section. We have now completed the traditional method. So we have gone through the actual traditional method, the key example champagne, and then this one, which is part 4, Cava, Cremant, and the others of the world. I hope you have learnt something. I hope it is helping you study, revise, and give you confidence going in towards your level 3 examination. There's all the social media as usual. You can get in touch with me if you wish for any concerns, comments, or questions. Thank you so much for all of the real positive messages you've been leaving on things like the YouTube comments and also private messages across the social media. It's lovely to know that this is really helping all of you with your studies for the level 3 certificate. So next time you're in London, please come and see me for a class at my schools, a glass at Streatham Wine House, or a bottle. It'll be great to see you. Take care of yourselves. Thank you for now. Goodbye.